Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, the NIL arms race is on across college sports, but what kind of ammunition are the Red Raiders working with? We get to it next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to see you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Always appreciate being your first listen on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts with the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan. Chris, great to be back with you once again, man, and always enjoy a day where we get to talk about something uniquely advantageous to our Red Raiders. And surprisingly or unsurprisingly to some, I don't know what people's expectations were out there about this. You may find that Texas Tech within the NIL arms race is being discussed among those who have set themselves up somewhat as uniquely advantaged, either compared to, say, peers in the Big 12 or maybe nationally as well. And we touched on it a little bit last week when talking about a national pundit considering Texas Tech a college football playoff dark horse and referencing NIL efforts and things like that. It's been mentioned elsewhere, and I want to get into some actual numbers as reported by the Dallas Morning News coming up on today's episode when it comes to what the return has been so far for Texas Tech. We'll get across some various programs, and we'll do some comparing and contrasting, again, elsewhere as it relates to peers. But Chris, this has become kind of a thing now, again, in a very beneficial way for a Texas Tech fan, that really the early organizational efforts led by some in the Texas Tech community have set themselves up very, very well to now have an impact. And obviously, we've already seen a lot of impact. Surprising or unsurprising, I don't quite know what I anticipated, but there's no question that Tech is keeping some pretty good company, I think, as far as these NIL efforts. And like I said, man, it's a new arms race. If you're not competing, you're falling behind in this area.
Yeah, and it's hard to follow like what everybody is doing and know and understanding exactly what everybody is doing, because I think but I think to your point, Cowan, I think what Texas Tech has done from the get-go is be really organized and unified. And I think that's very important. I think they've tried to do it the right way. I think they've tried to be fair and broad, not just honed in on one player or one sport or one side of the ball or however you want to phrase it. They've really tried to, kind of spread their wings a little bit over the department and all the teams. And they're not there yet, I don't think. But I think, starting out by paying however many players it was a flat fee, and now you're at the max on the roster at 120 being compensated, which has been widely reported. I just think those kinds of things, again, my opinion, I think that kind of thing goes a long way with helping you with creating some advantages for you from a recruiting standpoint, from ability to add a player, because this is widely reported and like this is not some secret. It's out there. You can Google it. It's been reported in multiple outlets in Lubbock and obviously the Metroplex and all that stuff. So if you're some player and you're like, okay, well, they don't have any scholarships, and you're like, hey man, would you consider walking on? However the conversation may go, I think that you know that, okay, well, at some level, maybe I don't have to pay for school or as much school or whatever because of what some of these monies were to provide. And that's just a football example, but I just think that to the point, I think it's very organized. I think it's trying to be very fair, and I think it's really helped in a space that is changing. It seems like by the week, by the month, certainly by the year. I mean, and here was the latest. I mean, so much so that I think, we mentioned Texas Tech. I mean, Kirby in the school even announced that, the Matador Club and the Red Raider Club are kind of now going to work together And like if you donate, money goes to one or both, or I mean that's up to I guess whoever's donating the money on how it goes. But they're going to kind of collaborate and work together a bit, which I think was a bit unique. I think I've seen A&M and some other schools kind of start to do something similar, or maybe, but Tech was one of the first where it's in the department, kind of. I think is the way you can read it. But it's not. I think there's certain rules that prohibit it from being like an actual arm of the athletic department, but it's as close as you're going to get to doing that. So, because for everybody that doesn't realize that the Red Raider Club has been in existence for a long time, this is what people you pay for season tickets and you pay for a personal seat license or whatever. Well, there's a lot of fees, then it goes to the Red Raider Club. Well, this is what funds scholarships for all the athletes that are on campus. I think people think that, the school just pays for the scholarship. No, the school actually has to be compensated by the Red Raider Club fund on all the scholarships. 85 for football, 13 for men's basketball, 15 for women's basketball, 11.7 for baseball, on and on. And I don't know what the total is for a department, but that money has to come from somewhere. And the Red Raider Club is tasked with raising that and then basically paying the university for all the athletes to be able to go to school for free room and board and all those kinds of things. The Matador Club is what people are donating. That is an NIL, fund, and that is what is in its infancy. What are we saying? 2 or 3 years old now, I guess.
Yeah, and the new arrangement, I'm assuming, came about as a result of the new bill that went into effect in Texas, I think July 1st, House Bill 2804, I think, that allowed essentially colleges to have more interaction with collectives or third parties, and I think kind of bridge that gap to a degree. Also, you can be grateful if you're into this kind of thing here in the great state of Texas that there was also some movement as it relates to other outside entities restricting the NIL efforts of a Texas-based institution. So I guess, say, the NCAA or whoever you might imagine to be in that role can't come in necessarily, again, and restrict that, which at the end of the day, Chris, it's competition. And you and I have talked about on this show before, from state to state, in some cases you had, different guidelines and different restrictions or different allowances. And in some of those states, they really care a lot about football. And that wasn't going to last for long.
It's like when you see, I don't even know all the different figures that have gone to bat for NIL in their states, whether it be a state rep or a senator or I don't even begin to know. But it cracks me up because, one, trying to follow the politics of this across the country, it's impossible because it changes. Everybody's got certain language in there, but it's funny because it's like, for example, you may have a guy like from, in the state of Florida, at some, hearing or trying to propose this or that. And he's got his royal blue, blazer on with his orange, gator on the deal going, now here's what I think we need to do, guys. I mean, and it's, right. and some of these folks are just huge, either alum or college football fans or whatever, but it's very transparent that they're trying to widen the plate for, what's best for maybe the institution that they graduated from. And basically, because our neighboring state of Georgia or Alabama or whatever is doing this. And so we need either an advantage or the same advantage as they do or whatever. And so it's been, because Oklahoma has been added. It's been wild to try to follow. And there's not a machine that can be built big enough to measure my indifference on the subject of the politics of the NIL. I'll just let them sort it out, man.
Until I think a lot of people would feel that way, and I would too, Chris, until it's limiting you in some way. And then you become very interested. But again, for the most part here in Texas, has not been the case, as obviously there's some influence wielded by people who care about college football and things like that here in the great state. Coming up dead ahead, let's get back to the 806 and specifically the lay of the land as it relates to Red Raider NIL efforts so far. What are various programs coming up with? And, of course, what's the gap from program to program? We certainly would anticipate that football is at the top of the list, but who else has been making some hay in that NIL sun. We're getting to it next on Locked On Texas Tech. First, today's episode brought to you by eBay Motors. And if you want a championship team, you need championship parts, and they've all got to fit just right. And it's no different when it comes to your vehicle. Every part's got to fit just right, and that's where eBay Motors is stepping in. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits exactly right the first time, every time. Just head on over to ebaymotors.com, add your ride info to the My Garage portal, and look for the green check to know the part is an exact fit, or you're getting your money back. No risk. In sports or in life, confidence is the name of the game, and that's exactly what you're going to have when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, and with the right parts guaranteed, you'll be back in the game and on the road in no time. So get the right parts, the right fit, and at the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers, eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network with Chris. I'm Casey. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode as we are cruising on to fall camp. But Chris, today, talking dollars and cents, I was really interested to dive into some of these figures from the Dallas Morning News just a few days ago as it relates to Texas Tech NIL return, I guess you could say, so far. Across the athletics department, where has the investment been? How do programs compare from one to another? And obviously, as you would anticipate, football is representing the largest slice of that pie to an extreme extent, with over $3.5 million reported by the football program when it comes to NIL agreements. Overall, Texas Tech just under $8 million so far when it comes to that total. One thing that's kind of interesting about this that you brought to my attention was just exactly how things could or could not be reported. And again, with a little bit more leeway between university and third party or NIL collective, maybe some of that burden has been eased. But it was a little bit tricky just to figure out who gets to say what these numbers are, right? Because initially the university is not, the organizer, supposedly, of these numbers. But I guess at the end of the day, somebody's keeping track of this, but there's some secrecy as it relates to these agreements. It's not like, hey, National Football League, here's our big bad contract, check it out and compare it to everyone else at every position, right? It's like kind of behind the veil.
Yeah, I wouldn't have. I was trying to. I think it's interesting that I guess that you can submit freedom of information on an NIL deal. I wouldn't. I think there was some debate on, are these players employees, and so do we have to give? Are they not employees? I mean, that's very much a gray area. I don't pretend to really understand that, but I think a lot of times there's some. Yeah, there is some, I think, and you read this in this space, it's not just in this state or whatever, but there's some non-disclosure, I think, on, and whether that is just somebody or like, hey, man, I just don't want you to tell everybody what we paid you, or we're trying to keep harmony in the locker room, so we don't want to disrupt, any sort of chemistry by having, whatever said company compensates somebody for a name, image, and likeness deal. Could be a variety of reasons, but yeah, a lot of times this is not widely reported. This is why I think it's interesting that you kind of, based on the morning news story that you're referencing, it's surprising that you get kind of a total dollar figure. Had no idea what it would have equaled total. Didn't know where the info came from. It's kind of fascinating, actually, and I don't know how it necessarily compares to others out there. And I'm guessing, you're not going to get some cooperation from a lot of different entities, namely the private schools, because there are institutions or collectives, I should say, that that are in the Big 12 they would like the collective would say, hey, man, we're going to do some media stuff with you, and we'll compensate player for just coming down and doing an interview. Because the rule is, and again, I'm not going to pretend to be some sort of expert here, but essentially the rule was it's not pay for play. You got to do something for this money. And I think like the Matador Club has made it perfectly clear. They set it up to where you must, I think, sign a contract and you've got to go do so many hours of community service. Like we're going to give back to the community here. And that's what, your time, your effort, and all that. And with that, we are going to show your name, image, and likeness and promote the South Plains Food Bank or Habitat for Humanity or whatever the different causes are. But other institutions have said, hey, man, come down, sit down, and do a podcast with us. And that'll be what you do for whatever name, image, and likeness money that has been agreed to. And so people are all over the map doing different things. So it's been, but yeah, how much money is coming or going out or whatever, it's kind of fascinating. And I didn't know that you could kind of tap into that on knowing how many, because I do know that like you have to, the way it's supposed to work, at least in its infancy, you were supposed to, if you got a deal, you had to tell, like, for example, you had to tell somebody at Tech, like, and report it. Like, hey, here's what I've done. Here's what they're paying me for. And here's what they're paying me to do or whatever. And so I think there was a level of, and maybe that's what, you try to like, hey, man, send me all those. I want to, I don't know how Joe Hoyt, or I think that's who wrote this article, how they phrased it when they asked for NIL information. But
yeah, and you mentioned a FOIA request, that versus public records request and the weeds of those differences. This is not the show to cover those things. So
yeah, I know.
He cites specifically public records requests within his article. So I don't know what pipeline that runs to.
Okay.
Could be something different than a Freedom of Information Act request as it relates to like a university. So I don't want to get anybody too tangled up, although we probably got you strapped down to the floor now in confusion. But Chris, I think, and we'll get to some partners in the Big 12 and exactly what they got going on, how Texas Tech is squaring up with them when it comes to the new Big 12 coming up here in just a moment. But may not be surprised to find that within this article, there was some referencing of elsewhere in the state of Texas and what's going on. I told you just under $8 million for Texas Tech for the athletics department at large. I think it was 7.8. You've also got some figures from Aggies, Longhorns, Aggies. $12 million is the number through the first 2 years as far as their athletics department is concerned. University of Texas, $15.6 million through the first 2 years. Of course, we probably all remember some individual or singularly high numbers from just a couple of deals that were really high profile that obviously helped that number. But while I was blown away by the $8 million for Texas Tech, let's not forget who your neighbors are. And it's always been this way. Mr. $15.6 million and Mr. $12 million down in Austin and Bryan College Station, just for context. But for Texas Tech specifically, I already told you 3.5 for the football program. Second on the list, 3.2 for the men's basketball program. Now, only a difference there of about $300,000, Chris, but obviously we all know roster size differential and deal differential. Dallas Morning News has it referenced as about a difference of 400 NIL deals between the football and men's basketball program, 544 and 155 for those two programs is what they report. Yet only $300,000 difference as far as the dollar amount is concerned. You've referenced this before, man. The basketball conversation has been up to this point dramatically different on an individual basis. Those deals have just been much, much bigger. And I don't mean just for Texas Tech. It seems like college basketball in general, individually, has really garnered some huge deals that I guess kind of make up the difference as far as those participating, because I don't know that I saw that coming, man, that you're only about $500,000 away from the football program when you've got, 90 fewer guys participating. I don't know what the difference is.
And the time frame that they're covering here is what? Is this a 2 year span?
Last 2 years.
Last 2 years. Okay. Yeah, so whenever this became a thing, and NIL was legal and all those things, men's basketball was always going to be the far and away leader in this space, just simply because, like, if I tell you you can go pay a football player or try to lure a football player or try to however we want to phrase it, at any position, even if you go get the best quarterback in the country or name any other position, and you compensate them well and all that, it's not necessarily going to turn your program or team around. I mean, look at Patrick Mahomes here. He was as good as we've seen, and yet it didn't show up in the win-loss column. Whereas basketball, you go get a bona fide dude and recruit him, then that can change your program. You could end up in the Sweet 16 or Elite 8, just basically because this kid scores 25 a game. I mean, it's so those are the differences. I think too, like the name, image, and likeness part of it is fascinating because there's a lot of football players. I mean, they can walk into a restaurant and somebody's like, okay, I know they play football. They look in really good shape. I have no idea who that is.
Never seen that face.
Yeah, they wear a helmet all the time. And you read the name on the back of a jersey. Basketball players, you see them. You see their facial expressions. You feel like you get to know them based on their emotions. And plus, they play 30-plus games as opposed to 12 or 13. So this is just kind of the difference, and it's, I mean, men's basketball is the leader. I mean, over baseball and football and all that stuff. And I think football is starting to, in the NIL space, they're starting to generate, or I get there's more NIL deals that are happening in that space, but yeah, I just think that the men's basketball thing is so unique because one guy changes it, and you know who these people are. You feel like you do have a relationship with them a bit because you see them so much.
So you got football, men's basketball, probably to no one's surprise. Baseball is next on the list, but there's a bit of a drop-off, Chris. Baseball under $400,000, around $392,000 reported. The softball program around $235,000 reported. Women's basketball just under $300,000 reported. So those are some of the next on that list. And I don't know what the future is going to hold because I still really feel like this is only the tip of the iceberg. So I don't think this list is like a determination of, all right, well, here's the lay of the land. It certainly will be for a football or men's basketball program to lead the way. But, given the fact that right now Wes Kitley's track and field program has only accounted for $15,000, and we know what kind of athletes come through that thing, I think that might change as some years roll by. I think there's still a whole lot more to be made there for guys like that or gals like that. And, of course, all these things only add up to mean what? Well, what you're doing against your peers, your colleagues in the Big 12 conference. What's it worth? $8 million if somebody is spending 15 or 12 or 20 or whatever it might be. Well, obviously that could change the feeling. And Chris, we've had some questions from Locked On Texas Tech viewers and listeners, kind of in the same vein as we now begin to we still got a year ahead to deal with Texas and Oklahoma in the league, but sort of begin to look toward the new Big 12. I'm wondering how you see Texas Tech comparing to others in the new Big 12. I hear great things about efforts NIL-wise in Morgantown. I don't know if that surprises you or not, but I see that one ranked highly as well. Texas Christian, Baylor, and some others. Baylor a little bit behind, it sounds like. Oklahoma State behind, it sounds like. But what do you think Texas Tech's spot really looks like when we get into the new Big 12 conference? Because I don't know if there's a top of the list, but I think all of a sudden you become one of the haves. Is that even something we want to say out loud? If a Tech fan woke up from 1962, you've been in a bubble, in a time capsule until now, and you just heard me call them one of the haves, you're bewildered. But I think it's a possibility. What do you think? I think all of a sudden you become one of the haves. What do you think?
I think they're trying to be. I think they're trying to be very relevant in this space. I think you mentioned, the Lady Raider program a while ago, and I think that was a well-publicized agreement last summer. I think that they've, come to an agreement with the baseball team, trying to give them a flat fee, and I think that it's supposed to. I think the goal is to try to, pay every athlete on campus something for their work and all those kinds of things, and again for charity work and whatever however else the Matador Club sees fit on setting it up. But I do think you're well organized. There's some schools that I think have been a bit timid and dipping their toe in the water a little bit. I think that, to your point about West Virginia, I think they were all of a sudden recruiting like crazy in men's basketball prior to the Huggins situation. And I think a lot of people pointed to, okay, they finally have gotten together on NIL and it's paying off or whatever. Whether that's true or not, talk to somebody up in Morgantown. Because I think Bob Huggins was even like on a coach's show before, about a year or two ago, he was like lamenting, like, I don't really understand this. Tell me about this portal. He's like just outwardly talking about didn't really grasp the portal and NIL and like it's working together and all these different things. It's just kind of like, he sounded like an old guy that was trying to, recalibrate to modern times. And it was a bit, so he was just kind of late to the party there. So then all of a sudden they started reeling in big time recruits and it's like, okay, I think he finally gets it now.
He understands it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But now he's out and all that stuff. But you had just mentioned West Virginia. But yeah, I really don't know about, like the Houstons or the Central Floridas, the Cincinnatis or the BYUs. I really, to your point, I'm curious how they will acclimate and what they've already got going. But I do think, you have a chance to be factor in heavily here. Which I think gives you some inherent advantages, just on recruiting. And it doesn't take away from anything. But like I would go back to baseball, Calvin. I don't mean to be long-winded, and I'll wrap it up here in a second. But I go back to baseball. You've lost 3 players to the SEC. Are we all naive enough to think that was just a baseball decision? I mean, I don't know. But in 2 to Arkansas within – I don't know. I just think it deserves an eyebrow raise there, and maybe you've done the same with in various sports or athletes. Who knows? But this is just kind of the landscape now, I think. And anyway, it's a new world out there that, like I said, that changes often.
Hey, if you go to Fayetteville and all of a sudden John Daly is writing you a personal check that draws upon the bank of Hooters and 84 Lumber, are you turning that down? I think I may be saying woo pig suey in that situation. I'm not so sure, so I don't want to
I sat next to his motorhome in an Augusta, Georgia parking lot several years ago at the Masters. He would set that bad boy up out on the outside the grounds of Augusta National, and he would set that big motorhome up and have a card table set up with 8x10s. I sat in that line for a period of time, and I was like, okay, it's too hot. I'm tired. I'm going to let the rest of the people have have John's signature. And I say sig because he was burning down a heater too.
Right,
but
of course,
that's a wild scene, man. Speaking of John Daly, that's a scene now. He's put some miles on that tank of his.
All right, enjoyed the conversation as always with you today, Chris. We got plenty more to get to the remainder of the week, so I hope you'll join us here on Locked On Texas Tech once again. We'll see you then, Chris.
Sounds good. We will talk mañana. NFL training camps are starting to report and everything, so you kind of start to, football is close to happening here. We're starting to get a little activity. Yes, it is. Still 105 degrees out there, but hopefully it'll start to cool off fairly soon.
Fairly soon. All right, subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. And we hope you'll join us for the next round once again on Locked On Texas Tech.